everybody, and welcome to the first episode of my new feminist podcast, From You to Me, The Voices of Woman Up. The podcast will be discussing fresh views surrounding the very powerful and still very important topic of feminism, and specifically the concept of Woman Up, which is the brand created by myself. This message of Woman Up encompasses and celebrates feminism through the feeling of inner strength, glamour, confidence in oneself, overcoming obstacles, and going forward with power to create equality. In each episode of this podcast, I'll be interviewing special guests on their views of feminism to discover their feelings on this subject and whether feminism has influenced their life and if they feel that Generation Z specifically need to woman up. Today, I would like to welcome the amazing woman who is Maureen Wayman OBE.
Hi Anna, thanks for inviting me today.
Thank you very much for coming. Maureen is Pro Vice Chancellor and the former Dean of Art and Design at Manchester Metropolitan University and the Pro Chancellor of Norwich University also, and now a regular visiting professor at the University of Chester. So thank you very much, Maureen, for being here today and for taking the time to help me on my podcast. It's very much appreciated.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. So the first question to kind of get us started on the conversation is, would you consider yourself a feminist? If you would, kind of how and why did this kind of identification begin? Has it always been a natural feeling? And if you wouldn't identify as feminist, kind of what is your view on feminism?
I've never, until you invited me to come and talk today, I hadn't really considered myself to be a feminist because it's not a word I use to describe myself. I'm more likely to say I've got autistic traits than I've got feminist traits. But because of thinking about coming here today, obviously I am a feminist, and I do care deeply about sort of equality, across every sphere. And so it's something that I've always been, but I've never really sort of worn it like a badge. Mm-hmm. In terms of my upbringing, I was an only child, but both of my parents were from very big families. And so I had lots of cousins, and I had lots of aunties and uncles. And amongst those aunties and uncles were some fairly fierce aunties. Mm. And obviously from a very young age, they have spoken out about sort of, inequality and human rights, and in particular the rights of women. Mm. And so I think it's something that was instilled into me without me really knowing. Because it's something that it's always been there. Mm. And then you add to that the situations that you found yourself in over, a very long career. Mm. And I think that possibly for all sorts of reasons, I can appear quite fierce. And I think I can be quite fierce. And I have been described on various occasions as being, fearless. And I'm not fearless, I am frightened of certain things. Mm. But in terms of working in the public sector, I would never ever show fear. Mm. And so I think for all sorts of reasons, yes, I am a feminist. And yes, I am irritated by the behaviour of certain people, male and female. Definitely. And, things have changed over the years, but not enough. Definitely. And so in terms of fighting a cause, there's still a big cause to be fought. Definitely. And, I will carry on doing what I do for as long as I live. So, yes, I am a feminist, but I've never actually worn it as a badge. Mm. But, I have sort of grown up in what I would describe as a man's world. Mm. And a lot of the time it isn't easy.
No. And you fought your way through that to have the brilliant career that you've had, and it's kind of always been instilled in you that your views, even though you don't wear it as a badge, it's very much you and who you are.
Yeah, and I think that my career, it's an odd one really, because I was a teacher for a long, long time, and I loved teaching, and so I had a design practice and I taught students. So my design practice fed into my teaching, so it informed my teaching. And I didn't put my hand up and say, oh, I want to be a manager, or oh, I think I should be a leader now. I didn't do any of that. I was sort of asked by a dean that I was working for to take over the leadership of 3 courses. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. I'm quite happy teaching. I really love teaching. So the conversation went on, and I was sort of, no, I don't like doing certain things associated with the administration side of things. I've always avoided that, you know. I don't really enjoy sitting in meetings. I don't really enjoy writing documents. I really love working with students. And so this man said, right, from that, I will assume that you have absolutely no ambition. Which was almost like throwing down a gauntlet. And I thought, right. And that was it, really. I took over the leadership of the course, well, the 3 courses. I led it through a review with the help of a couple of people. I was, at the time, a senior lecturer working with, 2 principal lecturers who were men. And the 2 of them, one of them was very supportive, the other one wasn't. And so, at the end of all this, I thought, well, I don't see why I should be working for half the money they're paid when I'm sort of responsible, and if anything goes wrong, it's down to me. So some upgrades became available, despite the fact I'd done the job for nearly a year on half the pay. I thought, well, I'm not going to do it any longer without being paid properly. But I still had to apply for one of the upgrades. It wasn't, done and dusted that I get it. So I applied for it, and I went into the interview with my resignation letter in my pocket, and I thought, if you don't give me this upgrade, I am out of here. Not next week, I am out of here today. And so I was interviewed, and I was told after that one of the people who was from a different university just said, well, if you don't appoint her, we will. And so that was it. They appointed me that day, and I stayed on and, did the job. But what I found was in order to do the job, I had to become somebody else. Because up until that point, everything had revolved around the student getting the best experience through informed teaching. And I found that I knew nothing about management. I really knew nothing about the national picture. And I knew very little about higher education and how it worked. And so what happened once I was appointed to that job was I had to put my nose outside the door, not in sort of Manhattan or Frankfurt or somewhere like that, but I had to put my nose out of the door in terms of looking at higher education and thinking, well, what's it about? What are they doing down the road? Is it equivalent to what? Are we getting a fair deal? Who are these other people? Who are my peers? And so I had to start learning about higher education and the management of courses, the management of departments, the different levels of qualification, all sorts of things. I was clueless about that side of education. And by then I'd been working in it for over 20 years. And so, you know, it was great because it was, you know, there was all this new stuff I needed to know.
Whole
so
new
it opened
space.
up a whole new thing that fascinated me. And so learning and teaching, you know, when I was teaching, the groups were smaller than the groups that we have in universities now. We had things like, you know, the master and the apprentice, everything was different. You had the time to be able to talk to students individually. The students had the time to be in the studio all day. You know, they would come in at 9, they'd go home at 6, then they'd carry on working in the evening, and that was the pattern. They didn't have to do jobs in the evening, they didn't have to do jobs at the week, well, some of them did, but not in the way that students do now. So it was very different then. But I had an awful lot to learn, and at that time, things were beginning to change. Student groups were growing, the resources were diminishing, and so things needed to be done differently. So I sort of had to rethink teaching, rethink how we did it. And so that to me was really quite fascinating. And it was just like going back to the beginning again in terms of, you know, well, how do we get the best for students, but with fewer resources, but still make it really great and really interesting and really attractive to see. So it was wonderful for me to have that almost like an epiphany moment. But I remember thinking, you know, at that time, and I was in Liverpool then, there were no women managing. There were no women as heads of department. There were no women as, you know, represented as deans. It was male dominated. And that was how it was. If I think back further, you know, from when I was a student and I did summer holiday jobs, you know, and at one point I worked in a factory, all the women were operating the machines. The men were walking around counting what the women were doing. So it was male dominated. That was the way of the world then, despite the fact that feminism goes back to the mid-19th century. It's taken an awful long time to achieve equality, you know. And even now, you know, I was looking at some statistics, you know, just looking out some statistics the other day because of this. And it's absolutely shocking. And trying to think about why is it like this? Why? You know, 150 years on, why is it still like this?
Why
you know, why is it that we have women in the private sector? You know, if you look at the FTSE 100 and the FTSE 500, if you look at those groups, the number of women in senior executive positions is like just over 20%.
It's just ridiculous, isn't it?
And you look at CEOs, you look at, you know, the chief execs, and it drops down to 6%. And you look at higher education, and although there are more women professors, there are more women vice chancellors now, there is still an imbalance. And I remember reading higher education, well, a report for higher education. They did one in 2016, they did another one in 2018, and it's called Women Count. And it would be a good read for you to have a look at that, you know. But we're still sort of trying to, you know, get our place. And why?
2020, we should already have.
That's right. You should
place.
have
It
that.
shouldn't even be a conversation.
It shouldn't be a
anymore.
conversation anymore.
No.
You're right.
And
it shouldn't
just,
be.
Yeah.
But women in those senior positions, and CEOs in particular, were earning 54% of what the men were earning for doing the same job.
And it just...
So as the situation that I was in 1993, well, from, you know, back end of the 80s through to the early 90s, where at first I was working for far, far less money, and but managing people, that were on more money, earning more money than me, that is unacceptable. It's unacceptable.
And it's not, it needs real change, and
It does.
Yeah,
it does.
I suppose the change has been slow and steady, but it's still not.
That's right.
Still not there, and
it's nowhere near. It's nowhere near. Looking at those statistics, it is nowhere near where it needs to be. And every so often there'll be a rise and then a fall. And you think, why is this? But I've worked for a lot of people, or worked with a lot of people, and I've worked for a number of vice chancellors, and the one who really inspired me most was the woman vice chancellor that I worked with and was part of her team, and she was an incredible woman, and I was really influenced and learned so much from her. When I first got the job, when I was managing 3 courses in Liverpool, the person that I worked with, I learned a lot from him. He was, he was a sort of a learning and teaching specialist, and I learned an enormous amount from him. But I remember one day him saying to me, you are the rudest woman that I have ever worked with in my entire life. And I took that as a compliment.
Yeah.
And I thought, I said, thank you. I said, that is great. And he looked at me as if to say, what? And I said, that is fabulous. I said, because, I will not be pushed down, and I will not stay quiet when I have views that I think should be heard. And I said, I won't be bullied and pushed around by anybody, and I've always lived by that. I've always lived by that. And I can remember working for one dean when I was at Liverpool, and I'm still in touch with him, and he found me extraordinarily difficult because I wouldn't comply. And I can remember him coming, we'd had a bit of a set to this one day, and I'd gone back up to my office, and there were 2 people sitting with me who were very, very supportive. One, a woman who was a feminist, very proud feminist. And this dean came into the office, obviously about to sort of, have another sort of argument. And I just noticed her lips start to go, her chin, start to wobble. And I said, just a minute. And I turned to her and said, don't you dare. Because I thought, I'll kill you. Never mind him. I said, don't you dare.
Don't make yourself look weak, almost.
And so, she sort of pulled herself together very quickly. And he shouted and he roared. And I just said, have you finished? And he sort of didn't know how to make his exit because he hadn't got the right response.
Yeah, he hadn't got the...
No. So the sort of, I don't tolerate bullies at all. Any bullies of whatever gender. I won't tolerate that at all. And so in that respect, I am quite fearless. And in that respect, I am quite wicked. Because I am very manipulative then.
That has been a very positive thing in your life, hasn't it?
So when I've had to deal with people like that, I have been at my worst in terms of the way that I've had to manipulate and deal with them. And there are plenty around. And that isn't it. I'm not proud of that, but I won't be the one to be made embarrassed or made to feel foolish. I'm smart enough not to get myself into that situation. and I am smart enough to turn the whole thing round. And that isn't something anyone should have to do either. And I was reading in I don't know if it was The Guardian, last week, the week before, about women MPs, black and Asian women MPs, who had actually admitted that they had been racially abused within Parliament, within those buildings. And one of them, Dawn Butler, who's a Labour MP, had been asked to leave she was in one of the coffee shops within the Parliament buildings. And because the policeman hadn't recognised her, he asked her to leave the building and to be escorted out of the building, despite she said, but I'm an MP. And obviously afterwards, when it was realised what had happened, she received a letter of apology. Now,
It shouldn't have happened in the first place.
Shouldn't have happened in the first place. No. A letter of apology? I don't think so.
That's rubbish, isn't it?
I don't think so. No. And so part of me thinks these are women representing, their constituents. They are representing everybody in their constituency, not just other women. But these are strong women who are leaders.
Fight for what they want and what other people want also.
That's right. And I'm thinking, this is the person who wants to be deputy leader of the Labour Party. No, you do not accept a letter of apology in a situation like that. You are a woman, and you are a woman who has the aspirations to be a leader. You do not accept a letter of apology. And so that to me is where there is more work to do. And in terms of Woman Up, in terms of feminism, you don't accept that. Would a man have accepted that? I think not. I think not.
World War III would start if a man got a letter and it would be in the press. It would have blown up, wouldn't it? It would have blown up.
So there are people who accept, and that is the problem for women, for feminists, who believe in equality, not, on sort of political, economic, social fronts. It's a problem when you have people who will accept that. And I mean, she will be a good woman, but you can't let that lie.
No.
And, there are many women who I will refer to as ladies, and
I understand what you mean by that.
Yeah.
Because I think woman comes with a stronger
that's right.
to it than
there's a
lady,
difference,
doesn't it?
So I will use the word lady, she's a nice lady, but
doesn't carry as much weight as woman, does it?
No. And I have friends that I've known for a long time who will want the door opened for them, and I'll think, well, okay, if you want to open the door, I'll say thank you and I'll walk through. I won't make a big thing of it, but I can open the door myself.
Yeah.
And when I married a long time ago, I can remember, my husband teaching me to change a wheel of a car, teaching me how to check the oil and water, so that,
You can do it yourself.
You can do it. And I didn't have a problem with that. I was actually quite happy to do that. Now, I have friends who are quite happy for their husbands, their partners, to make decisions for them, to, take responsibility for them. And if I'm in a room with them, I'm like, what?
You just want to give them a shake, don't you?
Yes.
I'm like, you're not an object. Why is this man trying to do this for you? Like, do it yourself. Like, I've been at work before, and I specifically, because I have a part-time job as a waitress, but I specifically remember this one occurrence that I was taking the order for a table, and this man obviously wanted to be the man of the table and man of the family, and so he ordered his food. Then he was like, and the lady will have, and I I had to stop myself from saying something. I was like,
I don't think
well,
so.
will the lady have or she? I'm sure the lady can speak for herself. And I really had to kind of bite my tongue to say something, but I think I kind of gave him a look.
Yes.
And he was like, but I was like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
What? The lady? No, she's a person, she's a woman, she can speak for herself, and it's I didn't like that at all.
So no.
At all.
So I sort of, you know, I'm drawn more towards women than I am ladies.
And I completely understand that. I completely understand.
You know, but
in a respect, do you feel the feminist space is broken in a, because we chatted about bullying, and would you feel like the feminism space is broken in terms of women as well as men dragging other women down? If that,
I think it's an issue. Yeah, I think it's an issue because you can't make people be something they're not. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know. But you can't really, you can educate, but that sort of personality, character can be influenced. But the person, if that person is a weak, needy person, you've got to just help to support them. You know, they're never going to change the world with you. They're never going to make things different. They might do a little tiny bit if you can move them along the way, but they're never going to, you know, they're never going to change the world. My daughter is an absolute sweetheart, and she thinks I say outrageous things. She's a teacher, and she teaches in a pretty tough school, high school, and she's a little scrap of a thing. She's a far nicer human being than I am, but she's no pushover. I am probably, you know, I've got a bigger mouth, and I'm sort of, you know, I know because I'm tall, because I have quite a lot to say for myself, I can be a bit fierce, and people recognise that just in the way I appear. She is, you know, quite pretty, blonde, you know, and she doesn't look fierce at all until you poke her with a stick. And I think, and I think to myself, I've done my job, you know, because, as I say, it's fairly obvious with me, because I've always wanted to appear different. So I've always used fashion as a sort of, not as an armour,
identity.
But, you know, and I know that I've been like that since I was a child. And I know that I've known lots of other people that have been sort of, you know, quite pretty, they've worn pretty clothes, and I've thought, God, look at that, you know, oh, those flowers, you know. And so I'd like to think that I've always been somebody that wanted to just be a bit different. And my daughter doesn't want to be a bit different in how she appears, but her views are very strong. So for me, I'm very obvious. For her, she's not. But, you know, she has a sort of personality in terms of what she wears and how she appears. And, but she still has very strong views, and she still will make her presence felt. And she is quite fierce, and she is a feminist, but she doesn't have an obvious badge. You know, which I think I'm far more obvious.
But I think even if you don't have that obvious badge, it's your beliefs and the way that you kind of carry yourself and the way that you are towards other people that makes her that very strong feminist still. And it's, you know, it's all in here, isn't it?
It is, but I think that there are a lot of strong women around now who, you know, have achieved such a lot. but there are far more out there that are underachieving. And, you know, you sometimes think, well, they've got they've got families, so there are gaps in their you know, their time in the workplace. It sets them back. People sort of think, oh God, you know, if it's even me, you know, when I was working in a management position, I'd think maternity leave, things like that. You know, there's a really good staff member. You know, if I'm going to be without her for a year or something like that, oh, you know, I'd get quite annoyed, but, you know, I'd support her.
Yeah.
And I'd support her coming back to work if I felt she needed additional, you know, professional development or whatever to get her back, you know, back on the ladder. Yeah. So, I mean, I was always aware of that. And I think with my daughter, she's a teacher, she does a lot, carries a lot of responsibility in terms of what she does at work. And she's just had her second baby, so she's off at the moment, you know. But she's still answering the phone and talking to them about this and that, you know. She's still helping, even though she's, you know, busy at home. But there's that side of it. But there's also the confidence side of things as well, in that quite often as a woman, you know, it depends what your upbringing has been, but so, oh, you can't do that, you know, she can't do that, she you know. So that again will sort of rub off and influence women. Think, well, no, I can't do that, you know, I just couldn't, I couldn't do that. And yet, you know, when I was within the university sector, quite often you get seriously strong women in the support teams, you know. So when I was working, I had women working with me in the offices, and without those women, I couldn't have achieved half of what I achieved, because they drove me.
Kind of push that.
That's right, you know, and I'd go, oh, do we really have? Yes. And so, you know, I worked with women who were in the sort of administrative roles, and they were incredible. They were incredible in terms of the way they worked and the support they gave. So we're a bit of a mix. Is it broken? We're a bit of a mix, and there is still that view, and I had it, you know, I'm not good enough to do that. I wouldn't be able to do that. And it's when you start working with different people, you think, God, what a fool. And you do realise that, you know, of course I can do it. And I always, I mean, when I became, after I'd been managing courses and I moved to a different university and I became a head of department, and it was a big department, and I had a lot of staff to manage. And then after a while, the dean's post became vacant, and I wasn't going to apply because I thought, oh no, I couldn't do that. I haven't got the nerves of steel to do that. And I remember being called into the dean's office, and he said, are you applying for this job? And I said, no, I'm okay doing what I'm doing. He said, well, what are you going to do if they appoint a fool? You know. And I said, I don't know. And he said, well, you better apply then, won't you? And that was how it came about. Because I thought, well, he obviously thinks I'm good enough to do the job because I'd worked with him and helped him. So he obviously could see something there. And so I applied and I got the job. And then a lot of the work I had to learn again. It was still a learning curve. And so I had to start learning again how to do the job. And I had to start moving in other sort of territories, if you like, to learn more about sort higher education. And so then I felt what my job was then was to work up, to work out, to work down, to ensure that those that were underneath me had everything they needed to be able to do their job well. And so I continued to learn to be able to do that job. But there was always that underlying, what am I doing here? Do they know who I am? Do they know I left school at 16? Because I was strategic. I didn't think at the time I was strategic in my thinking, but I was. Because when I was about 13, 14, I knew I wanted to go to art school, you know, and I knew I needed 5 O-levels to get into a foundation course. And I knew that strategically I could do that. And then I wouldn't have to stay and do A-levels. You wouldn't dream of doing that now. And so at 16 I left and did 2 years, sort of, you know, as a foundation, at a foundation level, before I then applied to go to London. I was only 18 when I went to London. If my daughter had said to me, I'm going to London at 18, I would have said, you certainly not. You know, but off I went at 18. And I was then invited back and given days teaching, you know, because they must have recognised in me, oh, she's interesting, and she's been to Central School, and she's done this, and she's done that. And so I came back and started to sort of work part-time and have my own practice. And for me, it was always that, am I good enough? Can I do it? What if they realise what they... But of course, nobody ever did, because I could do the jobs I was given to do. And so, you know, but there was always that question, am I good enough? Have I got the confidence to do it? And I think it's because, you know, there are fewer women than men at that level, far fewer, and you sort of question your own ability. And I think lots of women do that. And I think that is something that keeps them out, you know, of the career, off the career ladder.
Do you think that starts from a young age? Do you feel like, I think that Generation Z specifically don't have that confidence? I think because of the pressure of social media especially, and some people branding them as a snowflake generation who would online brand themselves as this girl boss feminism, and but don't actually portray it in everyday life and don't actually have that inner confidence. Do you think that's where the issue lies from a young age?
It's a problem. I think it's a problem, and I think it is from a young age still. I think there's still this feeling that, you know, even though there are more women applying to university than men, which is really quite worrying, you know, to in certain quarters, that is a concern, that there is all of a sudden there's this big imbalance. What's going on? So that is a concern to me. It's sort of you know, at school, if you think about children at school, and this is generally speaking, the boys will do the minimum amount of work to get through. That's been my experience. The girls always want to have it absolutely right. And I'm going to do it like this, I'm going to present it like that.
That was me.
Yeah. And so I was like that. And I was also nature table monitor, because I wanted everything to, you know, I was concerned about how things looked. And I would get quite cross if somebody moved the acorns over to be with the hawthorns and things like that, you know. But I think it is from a very young age. The girls are always sort of the ones to want to get it all done and get it right and to the best standard, the best of their ability. And the boys, you know, they'll just coast along. And whether it's because boys are spoilt by their grandmas, I don't know. But, I mean, I have grandchildren now, and I have a real smart one who's 16, and he's so laid back, he's practically horizontal, you know. But in terms of school, he's a high achiever. And I think, imagine what you could do if you really worked, you know. But probably a girl with less ability will eventually run rings round him because of that, you know, that sort of, well, I'll do it like this. So throughout my life, I have worked very, very hard. And as a dean and as a Pro Vice Chancellor, they were big jobs. And if we needed reports doing, my report was the one that was talked about. My faculty was the one that achieved, you know, my departments were the ones that won all the prizes. And I was absolutely focused, and I was almost, you know, it's like a killer instinct that I had that made me, if you work 8 hours, I'll work 16. And so I worked at weekends. I would bring it home in the carrier bags. Deadlines, no problem. If you want something by tomorrow morning, I will do it. So I was never in a position of failing on anything.
You wouldn't let yourself be in a position.
Absolutely not. And because of that, I was given more work to do. And so I managed a faculty of 3,500 students. I was responsible as a Pro Vice Chancellor for 34,000 students, academic standards and quality. I also used to liaise with the Students' Union on student experience. The job I did was impossible. So I managed academic standards across the piece. When we had reviews and validations and audits, I was leading on all of those. Now, you know, that amount of work was ridiculous. And in the end, I decided I've done enough of this. And I didn't see it as failing because I was asked to stay, but I did see it as, I've done this for how long? And I had sufficient wisdom to know that you couldn't work at that pace, at that age, for
Without
very
it being
long.
unhealthy.
That's right. And so, you know, when I did step down, I didn't see it as failure or running away.
Because that was your own decision.
Yeah,
for your
it was
own
my
self.
decision that I, you know, okay, I'm ready to do, not to retire, I'm ready to do other stuff now.
Yeah.
And, you know, but I've had enough of the pressures that have been on me this last few years. And I would have defied anybody to have done it better than I did, you know. So by that time, I was, not untouchable, but by that time, you know, no one could have said to me, you know, you haven't got the confidence to do this. Because I was absolutely in control of everything that was in front of me, working with a team of people who were really great. And I would always say we, never I, when I was in the workplace, because I knew that I wasn't doing it on my own.
You had that support team around you.
Although some days I would feel isolated, and that is another problem when you're in that senior position, because there are times when you are on your own and you are isolated and you're thinking, God, you know, have I got this right? And that can be really worrying. It can be stressful. It can put you under extreme pressure. And not everybody, male or female, is able to cope with that. And then as you step back from it, you think, is it really so important, 34,000 students? Of course it is.
Yeah, definitely.
So, but yes, I mean, is it broken? It's just getting through to people that they can do it, but they've really got to be prepared to work.
Definitely, and that's part of where Woman Up was born from. Just
they've got to be prepared
keep moving
to
forward,
work.
and the power and the overcoming obstacles, and not letting anything stand past that to get where you want to be.
Yeah, because you know, not everybody in this world is a nice person. And not everybody is supportive. You deal with all sorts of different people in life. And there are a lot of difficult people. And you have to, you know, it's not just knowing your subject. You know, it's knowing sort of how to manage a business, because that's what the universities are. And it's understanding how to manage people, students, support teams, senior academics, those that may well be above you. It's learning how to manage them, and it's sometimes, you know, having to manipulate them. And so you need a huge bag of skills, but provided you go, right, okay, how do you do this? You know, you can, because you know, I have one of my fierce aunties, my Auntie Ivy, used to say to me, never die wondering. And in other words, ask questions, be curious, you know, learn. And she always used to say to me, you never stop learning. If you do, you'll rust away. And those things have always stayed with me, you know, and she was absolutely right. And so I'm still learning now. But I have one particular friend who stopped learning, I reckon, in about sort of 1962. And I always go, but, you know,
but why?
Why? But, you know, there are people like that. Can you change them? Perhaps a little bit.
I think it starts from the self, doesn't
It
it?
does.
It
Absolutely does. It does. And as I said, sometimes I've had periods of self-doubt. Do I know what I'm doing? And I think that's a good thing. I think that, you know, you can be confident. I always appeared confident. But I did have self-doubts. But I never let them take that big a hold, because the next day I'd have to get out of bed and go in and sort something out, put something right, you know, take on a new project. And I think, you know, self-doubt is, to me, a positive thing.
I suppose it's almost that conscience.
You question.
It's your conscience, isn't
yes,
it?
It is.
Makes you human.
It is. Because you're saying, is this right?
Shows that you care.
Is this, yes, it does. Is this the best solution? Because if it isn't, 34,000 people are going to be affected by this. So, of course, you know, you have self-doubt. And I think women are have more periods of self-doubt perhaps than men. And sometimes it's seen as a weakness. But it is just questioning, is this the best solution? Is this the best decision? You know, have I got it right? And in the end, you sometimes are making those decisions on your own, and you think, oh God, you know, I hope to God I've got this right. You know? And you have to have the backbone to be able to do that. And it isn't always easy, and it isn't always the happiest place for you as an individual, because if you get it wrong, you know, you've got
There's a ripple effect behind that, isn't it? Definitely, it's so just to sum everything we've chatted about, where would you like to see feminism going, say, in the next 5 years, in the near future? What change would you like to see happen?
Well, obviously, I'd like to see more women in senior positions, you know. I would really like to see those statistics change quite dramatically, because I think they're unacceptable. And I think that, you know, women in higher education, well, women right through education actually, you know, the fact that girls are quite different than boys, the way they learn, the way they respond, the way they show what they've learned, what they want to achieve.
It's biological, isn't it?
It's fabulous.
It's psychological
It's
facts, isn't
fabulous. And so where along that sort of line of development is all of that sort of desire to achieve, desire to be best, desire to sort of show off, where does it go wrong? What happens
between
to undermine
childhood and adulthood that stops
to
that
undermine
confidence?
that confidence? Where does it happen and why? And I think there are a PhD for you in there, Anna, you know. So, you know, that is a question that has got to be asked because it is so obvious when they're children. And that sort of, I can do it, you know, is there then. Where is that lost? Where does that go? And so, you know, more women have got to be encouraged to apply for these top jobs. And if you don't get them the first time,
try again.
You have to go back. And I always remember when I was teaching and talking to students about, you know, these disciplines of fashion related, textile related disciplines. They're not easy disciplines. And it's not easy for students to get jobs. There are jobs, but it's not that straightforward. And so I always used to tell students, look, be prepared for the knocks. Be prepared not to sell something the first time you go out with a portfolio. Don't come home and cry and not do anything. Come home, think about the reaction or the response that you got, pick out the bones from what people said to you and do it again.
And make it better.
And go back. Until in the end, somebody thinks, God, this girl really means it. She's back again. You know, we've got to do something now. We've got to listen to her because she's resilient. She's not being put off at the first hurdle. She's coming back, and then she came back again. You know, you've got to be like that. You've got to keep going back. And do not fall at the first hurdle, because we can't achieve equality if people are going to just say, oh, well, they weren't interested. I'll go and lick my wounds and, you know, crawl off into a dark corner. Don't do that. You've got to go back and you've got to keep trying. And you can get it, but you've got to work for it. And for a long time to come, you're going to have to work harder than any male in the workplace to actually
to get half
make
place
that
that the male will be.
Absolutely. But until we get more women in those positions, it's going to be really difficult. But once we get them into those positions, the women are going to look for certain, they're going to be the ones choosing and selecting, you know. And to impress a woman, that is really tough.
It is, isn't it? And that is where the change
That's right,
will happen.
because they are the ones with all the detail. And so, you know, we've got to move it on. So the fight that started in the mid-19th century is nowhere near finished. And you know, it's getting better, but it's still bumping along that sort of bottom end. It's nowhere near the 50% mark. And it's just unacceptable. Unacceptable socially, politically, and economically. All of it. It's unacceptable.
It is. And yeah, until something at the top happens.
That's right.
To trickle down.
That's right.
To everyone to inspire that change. And that is where it will happen.
Yeah. A friend of mine is a Vice Chancellor, and I'm incredibly proud of her and what she achieves. And you know, she does a lot of national work, And I watch, you know, if she's on the television, and I think, yes, because
it's women supporting other women,
she's
isn't it?
clever and she's smart, and, you know, I'm just incredibly proud of her. And she has worked with other Vice Chancellors. She's been, you know, chair of national groups, and she's fantastic. And she's an absolute icon to me, and I think she's wonderful. And we need more like her.
We do.
Yep.
We do. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
For this has been fabulous and so interesting. So thank you very, very much. I've learned a lot through a conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't. I mean, when it, as I said, it's made me think. It's made me think of different situations I've found myself in. Not all of them particularly easy, and I often think about sort of. I make little of my achievements. I don't sort of boast about them. Well, I try not to boast about them, but, you know, my family, apart from my son, who, you know, thinks I've never had a proper job. I went to school at 5 and never came out. He keeps me grounded. But, you know, I've had a wonderful time, and I've enjoyed it. And, you know, I've had moments where I've thought, right, you know, this is it now. I'm going to get sacked. But, you know, I've had a fabulous career, and I'm glad I've been able to help people along the way. I've been very lucky, but I've worked hard.
I hope to have as much as a life and career as you have, and I hope that my views and my understanding of feminism and my learning will keep going as well.
It's just something inside you.
It is.
You know, Germaine Greer, I can remember Germaine Greer and her book, you know, that was written in the 60s. And was it 60s or 70s when Germaine Greer wrote A Female Eunuch? And I remember reading it years ago, but I was never particularly fond of Germaine Greer, even though she did a lot of work on behalf of women. You know, I felt the way she set herself up and you know, provoked people. I thought, there's other ways of doing this. And but she did a lot at that particular time. But I think that a lot of women, it's in here. And, you know, it's how you use it.
And it's my sense of self, it's who I am.
Yeah, I don't have to think about doing something differently or, you know, but I would just do it automatically because it's sort of inside
it's
me.
Ingrained.
Yes, it is. It is. It's absolutely ingrained. And my aunties and my mum saw to that when I was growing up, I think. And it's just something that I don't think about. It's just there. Okay.
And it's the naturalness that will keep growing.
Yeah. But I've had a great career. And,
Definitely.
you know, had some fabulous fights. And as I say, the best thing that happened was, you know, and it was a man called Cal Swan who did a lot of writing on art and design education, and he told me I was the rudest woman he'd ever met. And I said, really? That's fabulous. So, yeah. So, Anna, all you have to do is work hard and believe in yourself.
And it gets you places.
And yeah, you'll do it. But you just have to keep going, and that's it. And you're as good as anybody.
Thank you.
If not better than most. And that belief is what you have.
Is what gets you through, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank
Best
you.
of luck.